Now, before I turn it over to Jessica and Sawyer to talk about academic scholarships, I am going to talk about athletic scholarships. Now, you've probably heard a lot about athletic scholarships. You've heard probably the same old things when you hear about athletic scholarships, but essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the numbers behind why athletic scholarships are really hard to get, and also why you should not just focus on athletic scholarships. Essentially, once I go through all the numbers, your mind should be shifted toward the academic scholarship side. And then if you are, get the opportunity to get an athletic scholarship, then that is just an additional bonus to allow you to kind of pay way less when it comes to going to a university. So first thing is, if you just go onto the NCAA website, the NAIA website, they're going to talk about how much money they give out to student athletes. And if you go onto the NCAA website, they're going to say Division I and Division II schools give out over $3.6 billion in athletic scholarships each year to more than 180,000 student athletes. Division III doesn't give out any scholarships, but then also if you go onto the NAIA website, it's going to tell you that they're giving out over $500 million in athletic scholarships to athletes that play in the NAIA. Now, if we add that all up, that's over $4 billion. Now, that seems like a ton of money, and it seems like more than enough to go around so that everybody can get an athletic scholarship, and it should be so easy to do. But I'm actually going to go through the realistic numbers on why that is not the case and why it is so difficult to get an athletic scholarship. Then I'll also talk about some of the reasons, the problems with athletic scholarships, and some of the things that you might not really be thinking about when it comes to an athletic scholarship. And then after that, if you have questions, feel free to type those in. So if we're just talking about Division I, there's 338 schools in Division I that have soccer. Now, there's 338 schools in Division I. Now, if we're talking about just soccer, I'll talk about women's programs first. In Division I, there are 338 programs that offer women's soccer. Now, of those 338 programs, there's about 9,588 athletes, or about 10,000 athletes that are participating in women's sports or women's soccer. On average, each roster for women's soccer in Division I have about 28 athletes. Also, the scholarship limits for Division I for women are 14. So if we were to just take the number of scholarships with the average number of people on each roster, and again, if we're talking about average, there are going to be a lot more rosters that may have more than 28. That means that half of the players, if they were to get a full ride, have the ability to get a full ride. And as I go through the kind of the way that athletic scholarships work, you're going to understand that, the ability to get a full ride, it's not very easy, and they're not giving out full rides very often. They're going to usually break up those 14 scholarships that they have into 28 or 30 scholarships, and I'll kind of talk about those things as I move forward. Now, the average scholarship for women in Division I is $18,824. Now, that is not just tuition, that's just the scholarship that you're getting. So if that's on average, most schools are going to be more than that $18,000. So even if you're receiving a full ride, if you will, and again, I'm using kind of quotations around the full ride, there's still a lot more money that you're going to have to pay in total cost when it comes to going to the university. Now, if we're just talking about men's soccer, again, there's 338 schools in Division I. 205 of those programs play men's soccer. There's 6,000 athletes of those 205 teams. On average, there's about 29 people on each roster. Now, when it comes to scholarships for Division I men, there's only about 9.9 scholarships they're able to give out if it's a fully funded program. Now, everything I'm talking about is understanding that each program is fully funded. You're going to have to go and do the research and understand if the program is fully funded, if they're giving out the full amount of scholarships, because if they aren't fully funded, their scholarship limit might be 9.9 or 14, but if they don't have the money to give out that amount, they might only give out 3 or 4. So these are things that you have to do research on if you're thinking about athletic scholarships in general. Now, just moving on to Division II, again, I'll move a little quicker through this. There's about 264 schools in Division II. For women, 262 of them play soccer. Around 7,500 athletes that are playing in Division II. around 29 players per roster. And now the limit for Division II is 9.9 scholarships. On average, it's about $8,140 that each person is receiving when they're receiving an athletic scholarship for women in Division II. Now for men, Division II, 210 of the 264 programs play men's soccer, around 6,704 athletes. And again, this is from 2020, so it may be a little bit more. Also around 32 athletes per roster, and again, these are the averages. Now there's only about 9 full scholarships that each Division II fully funded program can give out. On average, that's around $6,687 if you're getting a scholarship from a Division II program. It's important to remember that Division III, they do not offer any athletic scholarships whatsoever. And that's kind of part of the athletic scholarships in general, is that if you're looking at only athletic scholarships, you're cutting out a huge portion of schools that not only can be a great fit for you to go to school, but great fit for you academically. So it's really important that if I'm just focused on that athletic scholarship, you're really not going to be looking at Division III. And Division III has a lot of opportunity when it comes to being able to go to school, go get on a team, get a lot of playing time, compete to get a lot of playing time, go play in national championships, and really have a great experience when it comes to getting an education, but also playing soccer. So I would say that's kind of one of the bigger problems when it comes to the athletic scholarships, is that if you're focused on scholarships, you're not going to be looking at Division III, and you're really cutting out a huge portion of what you can be looking at. Now for NAIA, there's about 213 schools. For men, 204 of them play soccer, around 6,500 athletes. Now the roster size is a little bit bigger, around 32 athletes per roster on average for an NAIA school. For the scholarship limits, there's 12 scholarships now. Again, that's 12 scholarships split among 32 athletes on average per roster. So on average, it's around $7,700 that you're receiving if you receive an athletic scholarship to play in NAIA. For women, of the 213 schools, 212 of them play soccer, around 5,524 athletes, so it's a smaller amount of athletes that are playing in NAIA. Now, on average, it's around 26 athletes per roster for women. It's still 12 scholarships that they're able to give out for NAIA. And on average, you're getting around $7,600 if you're receiving an athletic scholarship in the NAIA. Now, there's even more opportunity when it comes to other 2-year schools, other 4-year schools, junior colleges. They're able to give out scholarships. But when we're talking about athletic scholarships, these numbers are very small. Like on average, we're talking about anywhere from $200 to around $800 that you're receiving per year. So as you can see, that amount is so small that it really is going to make it, even if I'm going to a junior college and I'm receiving some sort of athletic scholarship, I'm still going to have to pay a decent amount of money to be able to get my degree. So some of the problems that we're having with athletic scholarships is that there's multiple factors that are completely out of your control when it comes to an athletic scholarship. Maybe the coach or the program doesn't need a player in your position or your grad year, or they've already given out all of their scholarships that they have available for that year to other players, and now they just don't have any money to give you. Also, there is a limited amount given out, like I kind of went through with the numbers. When we're finished with this, I can also send out a chart of kind of what those numbers are. I know I kind of read them and went through them, but I have a full chart of what those numbers are when it comes to the different divisions and the averages and things like that. But everything they had in common is that there's a limited amount of athletic scholarships given out. Also, players tend to overlook the school and focus on the scholarship. So if someone says, hey, I can give you a full ride to come play at my school, and again, the full ride is not necessarily covering all the costs that you need to be able to go to school there. It might not even cover half. And now I'm not necessarily focused on the school. I'm focused on the fact that I'm getting money. I might overlook some of the things that, might not be good for me to go to and go live at for 4 years. So it's important that I'm looking at the entire school, not just the fact that, they can give me scholarship money. Now, also full scholarships are split between multiple athletes. There are very small amount of athletes that will get a full ride. I believe it's less than 1% of athletes in high school that will get a full scholarship. And again, when we talk about full scholarship, it's not covering all your costs that you need to go to school. for the most part, they're going to be split. Like when we talk about 9.9 scholarships or 12 scholarships, that's going to be split between multiple students. So, for example, I might just be receiving $1,000 a year for books, or I might be receiving money for a food plan or something like that. So it might only cover a very small fraction of what I'm going to need to pay to go to school. The other thing is that athletic scholarships can be taken away year to year. So let's just say, I didn't perform the previous year. I received some money my freshman year. I just didn't do as well as I thought I was going to do. I didn't start. All of a sudden, that coach wants to give some of that athletic money the next year to another player that's going to come in and be able to start. They can take away that money and give it to someone else. And now I'm kind of at that school. I can transfer if I want to, but again, that's going to cost you a lot of money as well. So it's important to understand I'm not just relying on the athletic scholarship, because it does have something to do with performance and being able to kind of live up to the expectations of coming in and being able to start and do the things the coach needs you to do. The other thing is that injuries. If I get injured and, you might come across a coach that is a great person that's going to say, you know what, this person got injured. They still need the money. We're going to give them the athletic money, even though they can't play. They hurt their knee and they're not going to be able to play for a year. They had to have surgery. That situation, it might happen. But for the most part, if you get injured and a coach needs that money the following year to give to another athlete, they might give that money to another athlete. So if I get injured or if something happens where I'm not kind of living up to the expectations, I might not receive that athletic money moving forward. Now, the other thing is, when athletic scholarships are given out, it is at the coach's discretion. So let's just say a coach leaves the program. A new coach comes in and decides, you know what, I want to give all the scholarship money this following year to all of my recruits. So all the people that had that money in the previous year, I'm going to be giving it to my recruits that I'm bringing in. And again, that may not happen all the time. Some coaches might come in and say, you know what, all the people that are getting athletic scholarships, we are going to kind of stick with those, that kind of stuff. But you can come into a situation where a new coach comes in and decides to give it to their recruits, and you can be out of money. So these are all big problems when it comes to athletic scholarships. And the biggest thing that you need to understand is that none of it is guaranteed. You might get a, again, quote unquote, full ride your senior year in high school leading into your freshman year in college, and then you get hurt, something happens, a new coach comes in, and all of a sudden that full ride, which again isn't going to cover your full cost, now you're not receiving any money. And now you're looking at that price like, oh, it's $35,000, $40,000 a year. How am I going to be able to afford that? So with that being said, that's pretty much it for my side of things. If there's any questions, I'll go through and kind of answer those questions. Right now, there's no slides right now. I'm essentially just going through the numbers of the athletic scholarships. There's going to be slides when we're going through the academic parts of things. So when I'm talking about all the scholarships, I'm talking about each year. So it's not the total amount for the 4 years. That would be per year. Again, there's no slides that we're talking about. I'm just kind of having a conversation about athletic scholarships. Are there any other questions about it? I'm going to turn it over right now to Jessica and Sawyer, and now they're going to talk about academic scholarships, and there will be slides in their part of the presentation. Now, if you do have questions about my part, again, feel free to type those in. If you have questions about their part, feel free to type those in, and we'll get those answered as we're going through. So Jessica, Sawyer, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you guys are going to talk about academic scholarships.
Yes, that is correct. Can you see our slide that we've shared?
Yes, we can.
Okay, awesome. So we'll briefly introduce ourselves soon. Thanks, Jeff, for all the really great numbers and information. It certainly saves us a lot of time and effort, too, talking about that, because the world of athletic scholarships can be its own kind of wily beast to tame, separate even from those academic scholarships and need-based scholarships. So we're going to have a presentation. We are co-founders of Virtual College Counselors. Let's get this going. There we go. My name is Sawyer. Just a little bit about my professional background. I worked in college admissions for a little over 4.5 years. And so I worked at a small liberal arts school called Hendrix College. If people are familiar with it, it's part of the Colleges That Change Lives consortium. It is also a Division III school. We were a relatively small school, about 1,200 students. So I was pretty fortunate to have close relationships with the coaches when they went out recruiting. So that was really nice. My personal background, I'm originally from Southern Alabama. I'm a low-income, first-generation college student. So believe me when I say that finances and scholarships and grants and loans were always at the forefront of my mind, not only during the college search, but especially when I got into college. When I was working at Hendrix, I recruited in over 23 different states. I was in charge of the international recruitment as well, and then did a lot of work with first-generation college students. Ultimately, I ended up leaving Hendrix last summer and joined Jess in a partner venture to create virtual college counselors. The reason being is that as you kind of climb the ladder in the admissions world and get your supervisor roles, you actually move farther and farther away from students and families. And that was, and still is, my favorite part of this job, is working with students and parents and families, helping guide them through the process. And so ultimately, I decided to leave admissions and start an independent education consulting business and allow myself to do what I love, which is helping students and families find the right college. That means the right academics, the right location, the right price, the right campus culture, all of that good stuff. So that's a little bit about myself. And Jess, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Jess. My background is actually in forensic psychology. I'm also a licensed professional counselor and a certified educational planner. I kind of kept stumbling into this college counseling field for the past decade and ran my own business for about 5 years before joining forces with Sawyer here. But like Sawyer said, our whole goal is to make sure that the students that we work with are really finding those schools that are good fit for them financially, academically, and socially. My story isn't too far off from his either, but I didn't think that where I went was a great fit for me. And I was very unsettled at the very beginning of college. And ultimately, if I had to do it all over again, I would still make the same choices. But knowing what I know now, we can help guide students to avoid some of those things. And I've kind of been all over the place. I was an operations research analyst for the Army on a missile range for a few years. And again, just kept coming back to the college and career counseling. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
Yeah, and before we dive any further, something about virtual college counselors that we want to make abundantly clear, as you'll probably notice through most of our presentation, we have kind of 3 core tenets to what we do with our company, and that is honesty, transparency, and authenticity. And all of those are both so that we can be happy doing our jobs, which makes us do our jobs better for the students and families, and also so that students and families can feel more comfortable. The idea being that honesty, we're always going to tell you the truth. That's just an ethical guiding principle. Whether the truth is something you want to hear or not, we will let you know it nonetheless. When we talk about transparency, the world of admissions and sometimes financial aid can kind of be a black box, and we do not like that. We want as much transparency and as information as possible. It's one of our goals to just provide as much free information as possible for students who can't afford our services. And then authenticity, us being ourselves. What you see right now is what happens when we turn off the camera as well. We oftentimes will tell families that is who we are. We're a little bit goofy. We like to have fun with the process. We like to get students accepted to colleges with great scholarships, but also help them grow as people on the journey. And if that's not what you're looking for, that's totally fine. We can refer you out to another college counselor that might be able to get a little bit more aligned with your views, but you're never going to get a disingenuous vibe from us. So that's kind of what we work as, and as we go forward, something to keep in mind.
So common acronyms. These are all acronyms that you're going to see and hear if you're on any parent forums about paying for college or going to college on Facebook or anywhere else. Super common. If at any point throughout this presentation we drop an acronym and you don't know what that is, ask us in the chat. We are happy to mention these repeatedly, but things that you should know. COA is cost of attendance. We're going to break this down for you a little bit later. NPC, net price calculator. Every college in this country, in the US, is required by law to have a net price calculator on their website. They are typically very difficult to find. It behooves them to hide it. So to find it, Google the name of the college and net price calculator, or NPC, or use the search feature on each college's website. It should come up. If it doesn't, you can reach out to admissions and ask for it. They, in theory, should be accurate. The one thing I will say, as you're looking at colleges, run this net price calculator early on and take a screenshot. If the financial aid letter comes back later in a year and is very different price-wise, then you can use the net price calculator screenshot as leverage to get more financial aid, because they're supposed to be accurate for that institution with the accurate information that you input. Fafsa, the free application for federal student aid. It's a funny word to say. The F is before the S. You'll hear FAFSA a lot. It's wrong. So FAFSA is the financial aid documents that you'll be completing to get any financial aid from the government. EFC is expected family contribution. When you complete the FAFSA, this number is going to appear at the top. It will not be labeled EFC. It will not be labeled expected family contribution. Rumor has it they're going to call it something else. But what you need to know is whatever that number says, that's what the government is saying that you can afford to pay for college. I can guarantee you in 99 out of 100 cases, it is not going to be a number you can afford to pay for college. But knowing that going into the process will be very helpful when you're looking at the total cost of attendance and scholarship opportunities and things like that. The Css Profile is another form of student aid that needs to be completed by, it's about 200 private colleges utilize that. It requires a lot more information. It's a very convoluted form, and I don't know a single parent who was excited to fill it out. So that's one of those things that, like, set aside a few hours and just get through it.
Right. And we will be tackling a lot of these. The reason we put this first is because there will be slides that break this down a little bit more. And we don't want, people to feel completely lost as we begin to bombard you with the alphabet soup that is the college acronym world, which can get ridiculous at times. So we talked about on the title slide, the who, what, when, and where, and why of kind of scholarships. And we wanted to stick pretty closely with that because scholarships and financial aid can be a pretty huge sinkhole. You can fall into it pretty easily and get lost. We could honestly spend an hour talking about just any single one of those questions. So we kind of decided to break it up into those categories to make it a little bit more digestible. And we have slides to help with that. So the who, right? Who are the players in the scholarship game? Because a lot of times people aren't really sure where the alignments of individual groups or organizations. So with this handy dandy little feature, we have put it over on the side, and we see students, parents, families, and college counselors. I would add ourselves, so independent education consultants, on that side as well. That side is essentially, if we can think of it, I will say a pro-student role. Not even to say that the other side is anti-student, but rather these are the people who are going to be looking for that financial aid. They're going to be looking to receive grants or loans or scholarships, looking to reduce the price of tuition or cost of attendance. So these are going to be the people who are going to be most likely most of you, anybody who's advocating for a family or a student. On the other side of that, we have more the institutional side. So when we think of colleges, universities, those are the two that are probably most familiar. Aside from that, we have a couple other up here, though, for very specific reason. Businesses, community-based organizations, and nonprofits. So why are they on that side? They are on that side because they are usually some of the most active providers of scholarships outside of those colleges and universities. We'll talk about it a little bit later, like what is an outside scholarship and what does that mean? How does it stack? But it's important to remember that if we're looking at the right side, those are going to be the providers of financial aid. So anything having to do with that. I guess another one you might throw up there would be the federal government or the Department of Education because of student loans and Pell Grants. But that's just a really quick breakdown so we can think of, okay, there's two primary actors in this. There's the advocates for the students, and then there's the people who actually hold the scholarships. So this is a lot of words. You don't have to understand or read everything right now. We're going to tackle the main kind of problem and issue. So the problem about the cost of college is that colleges and universities are rarely transparent about what the actual cost of attending a university is. Sometimes this is intentional, and sometimes this is just a really complicated field, especially when you try and market something. As you can imagine, nobody, and speaking from experience, no admission counselor wants to stand behind a plastic table in a gym in a college fair and explain how their college is valued at $66,372. It's a nightmare of a conversation. And I will tell you that as someone who's had it many times.
That's the annual cost.
Yes, the annual cost. And if you're wondering about these numbers are pulled from a private small liberal arts school. So these are not fictional. These are actually real numbers. And these are actually kind of on the cheaper side of smaller private liberal arts school. CBO is a community-based organization. So anything that is like a local organization that might provide scholarships. Answering a question from the chat. So what is the cost of college? That's what we want to get to right here. We have two really important determiners when we talk about the cost of college. We have the direct cost. This is the cost that you will pay if you are a student or family attending a university. So this is going to be tuition, it's going to be room and board, it's going to be fees, and most likely loan fees. So when we think about what does direct cost mean, how I used to explain it to families, it's the simplest way, is that at the end of the day, if you get a bill in the mail or if you sign up for a payment plan, the direct cost is going to be what you're actually paying to the college. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what are the other costs? There's what they call the estimated cost of attendance. I have descriptions beneath both of these, but I'm not going to belabor the point of reading them out loud. An estimated cost of attendance is required by the federal government to be attached to those direct costs. And usually, almost in every case, what those cost of attendance covers is things outside of the college's control. So for example, books. What is going to be the average price of books for classes? Transportation. What is a reasonable amount for a student to transport back and forth from the college to their home? Personal expenses. So if a student wants to go out and get food, if they need to stay on campus during Thanksgiving break and the lunchroom or cafeteria is closed, those are the things that they are thinking about. And these numbers are done by the financial aid offices at the institutions, then later approved by Department of Education. Now, these can vary wildly. So let's take Hendrix College for an example, because that's where I worked. Hendrix College is about 30 minutes from Little Rock. And when we're talking about Arkansas, it's in Conway, Arkansas. They are not going to need $1,800 to travel 30 minutes on an interstate between Little Rock and Conway if Little Rock is where a student lives. So that cost of attendance is pretty outrageous when you think about what a student close might be expected to spend. If a student is coming from Oregon, they're going to have to take a plane back and forth to the college at least a handful of times a year. We're thinking winter break, summer break, beginning and end of both of those breaks. So that's at least 4 flights or so. Then you've got any kind of like spring break, Thanksgiving break, all that kind of stuff. So that's where they come up with those numbers. When we combine the direct costs and the estimated cost or the estimated additional costs, that's where we get this term cost of attendance. This is really important to kind of think about because the price that is on the college propaganda, the brochures, the magazines, whatever it might be, you really need to figure out what is included, what isn't included, and how does it all shake down. Because a college might actually cost less than you see on the page, or you might be expected to actually pay more. So a little bit about that breakdown, and highly recommend if you want to go back and rewatch the VOD to just kind of pause right here and look through it a little bit.
So, what is financial aid? We throw this term around a lot, and I feel like it doesn't get broken down early enough in the process. So, you're here now and you're about to get the breakdown. There are two forms of financial aid. There is need-based aid and merit-based aid. We'll talk about both, but in general, need-based aid is determined by that EFC, the expected family contribution, which is from the Fafsa form that you fill out. Merit-based aid is determined usually by an institution and or outside scholarship committee, but is typically related to a student's academic prowess or a particular skill or talent that they might have, including athletics, music, art, all of that. So different kinds of aid, though. Scholarships and grants are money that do not need to be paid back ever. There are institutional grants and institutional loans. And what that means, the college or university is that particular institution. And those grants and loans can only be applied at that particular institution. So say you apply to a few schools, you get this offer for, a $20,000 grant from a school like Chapman University. You can't take that grant to go to Loyola Marymount. You have to use it at Chapman. The Department of Education and the federal government award other forms of grants and loans. For loans, there are subsidized and unsubsidized loans. Subsidized loans means that the government is actually paying the interest while the student is still in school. There's typically a 6-month grace period following graduation to allow students to obtain a job or start graduate school, in which you can defer even further. But as they're subsidized, that means they're not accruing interest for you to pay. Unsubsidized loans are accruing interest. The second that you sign that document, it starts accruing interest, which means that whatever loan number you're taking out, it's likely going to be a lot more than that by the time you're paying it back.
So Jess, real quick.
Sure.
Is it that big of a deal, the unsubsidized versus subsidized? I mean, we're talking about a couple $100 when it comes to that interest that's accruing. Or are we talking about a lot more than that? I just want to kind of get an idea of, why it's important between the two of them.
Absolutely. So it can absolutely be a big deal. It can be thousands of dollars. It can honestly, over time, you could wind up paying double the amount of the loan that you withdrew because of the interest.
Yeah, one of the things I'll add on that is that anybody who has seen a financial aid award letter or who has had a child go through the process, typically there's a max amount of loans that the Department of Education will allow a student to have. And for most years that I've worked, at least, it's been around 5,500.
And it varies by year that you're in college. Yes. So freshman year is a different number that you can take out than junior and senior year.
Yeah. And the reason I say that is because if you are a relatively low income family or you have a low EFC, you're going to get offered that max amount, that 5,500 in loans. And how they'll usually break it up is they'll make maybe 2,500 subsidized and then 3,000 unsubsidized. The idea being that it sounds terrible, but it's almost like they're pressuring you to get that more money. You're going to have to take the unsubsidized in addition to that subsidized. It's important to know this now just because college loans have a really bad rap because they can be tricky, and if left unchecked, they can grow into a pretty malignant force in somebody's life. But I think it's also really important to realize that at the end of the day, loans are tools. They do not have like agency. It's not like a loan is malicious. Ultimately, it is all in the hands of the people who take out the loans, how you decide to repay them, how much you take out, and understanding the long-term repercussions of taking out those loans. I think that's one thing that oftentimes gets lost. I took out student loans, but I was also wise enough to realize that, one, given my financial background, that was the cost of doing business. So if I wanted to go to the school I wanted to go to, I needed those loans. And two, I never will recommend for any family to take loans outside of those student loans. So private loans, third-party loans, anything like that, across the board, almost every admission counselor will recommend against it.
Avoid as much as possible.
Yeah.
What's important to know is these particular loans that you can get through Fafsa have incredibly low interest rates.
Mhm.
I'm talking like 2.5, which if you have ever taken a loan out for a car or a house or anything else, well, I guess the house loans are. Anyway, point being, very low interest rates compared to private loans,
Right.
Which is why it's so important when you are doing that college search that you're focusing on the financial fit of the school for you and not like as a primary factor, because it can be incredibly grueling and impossible to pay these loans off. For the unsubsidized loans, I know a lot of families that actually choose to pay the interest plus a little bit extra to start paying down that principal early on while the student is in school. So in addition to paying the tuition bill and that out-of-pocket cost, they're also paying off the loan already the second school starts, which is a smart way of doing it if it's possible.
Right.
The other types of awards through the government, if your family income is below a certain threshold, you may receive a Pell Grant, which is free money from the government. Awesome. Also, if your income is below a certain threshold, you might receive a work study. Now, these can be very confusing in a financial aid award letter because they appear to be free money, and it's not. So a work study requires a student to actually find a work study job on campus and then work hours at that job to obtain that money. But that check doesn't go to tuition, it goes to the student. So it's really important early on to have a conversation with your student
Yep.
about what the expectation is. Is that going to be their spending money? Because that means that whatever that work study award is, that's still money that needs to be paid to the university.
Mm-hmm.
Even though on paper it might look like it's just a given. We can talk more about that if anyone has further questions. I had a great work study job when I was in college. I worked at the law school library. None of the books could be checked out. So I was super busy doing my homework for hours on end, and I got paid to do my homework, and it was great. Highly recommend finding a job similar to that. But you could also work in an admissions office, and most campus jobs can be utilized as a work study. The other important thing to know is the work study amount is set in stone. Towards the end of the school year, you might be able to negotiate for more money, but there may come a time where it's April and the school year doesn't end until June, and you've already accrued all the hours, you've earned all the money, and you technically like can't keep your job anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important also to have these conversations early on so that you know how to pace yourself and know how your boss should be scheduling you so that you can continue earning that money in a steady fashion instead of being out of that job and then having to find a different job because they needed someone to fill in for you. There are also some states that have their own grants. Some states have their own financial aid forms to fill out in addition to the FAFSA and the Css Profile. California is one of those states. I don't know off the top of my head all of them, but California has 3 different levels of what they call a Cal grant. And it is, again, based on family income. And there are certain tiers of income that you need to earn the specific amount of grant money. But that is, again, free money that you don't have to repay.
I'll add a couple more in there. In the Southeast, these are pretty familiar for people who live in that region. So Tennessee has a Hope Scholarship. Louisiana has TOPS. Arkansas has a Challenge Scholarship, which isn't guaranteed, but it's pretty easy to get into. So a lot of times those states will offer those incentives. And the reason they'll do that is because they don't want their students leaving their state to go to college. So, for example, if I'm in Arkansas trying to recruit a student from Tennessee, I basically have to convince them to leave $4,000 off the table because they're going to lose their Hope grant. So keep that in mind as you go through the college search as well.
Yeah, Georgia has Hope and Zell. Florida has Bright Futures. There's a lot, and it's really important. And it's a quick Google search, name of your state, and like college funding. You might be surprised by how much free money might exist out there for you. You just have to be sure to actually fill out the forms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a new question. How does the whole FAFSA work for split families? Are both parents' incomes? Great question. So, very complicated. Only one parent needs to fill out the FAFSA. Actually, only one parent can fill out the FAFSA. You will be causing yourselves a lot of headache if two parents fill out FAFSA and they're not linked and it's a complicated mess. One parent, if there is a family that is divorced, it is typically the parent who's claiming the student on the taxes. The taxes are determined by like 2 years prior, which is, again, incredibly confusing. But don't worry, when you start to fill out FAFSA, it will tell you what year of tax documentation you will need to be able to fill it out. The Css profile requires both parent income and assets and everything else, and it is a beast. With FAFSA, because only one parent fills it out, they say that it should be the parent who the student spends at least 50% of their time with. This gets tricky during leap years. The question that always comes next is, well, it's 50-50. Like, no, there's an uneven number of days in most years, and it can't be 50-50. That's how nitty gritty they will get it. It's not a huge deal. It's a little complicated, but super not a big deal. One parent fills out FAFSA. But if the school also requires the Css profile, all family information will be on there. And it gets even more complicated when we start talking about families that are remarried and step-parent income and everything like that. And there are studentaid.gov is going to be your friend in tackling all of those very detailed issues. And we're getting to this soon, but we also very much recommend talking to a financial advisor or a college like financial planner very early on in the process. I'm talking 8th grade or freshman year if you can, because it can be very complicated and it's nice to plan ahead. A ceiling level,
yeah.
Yes.
So there is.
It changes every year.
It also is interesting because each school kind of has different amounts. Like, for example, if a school has, well, actually, this is a great example. So, like, we'll use California and Arkansas, right? So, Arkansas, a 60,000 EFC is pretty high, actually, for the state. And you're going to be hard-pressed to find any type of financial aid there. If we move over to California, you know, a 60,000 EFC because of the cost of living is a completely different scenario. So that's something to keep in mind, is it depends where you're applying as to how far your money will go.
Something that comes up a lot. So, for example, a lot of the highly selective institutions that don't have merit aid, which is scholarship money because everyone is incredible, a lot of them have very large endowments and have earmarked a bunch of money, billions of dollars, to help students coming from low-income households. But sometimes that low-income household threshold at those schools is actually quite high. I think last year, Princeton's threshold for getting some tuition assistance at their school was $250,000. If your family income at most of those schools is below $60,000, you get your room and board and tuition covered. And some schools that's called meeting full demonstrated need. Some schools will meet full need without loans, and others will meet full need with loans. And it's important to actually know that differentiation, because just because they're saying, yeah, I'll give you $80,000 a year in loans doesn't make that a good choice. And it's not super helpful. When to fill out FAFSA? Great question. You are in 9th grade. Absolutely nothing to worry about yet. FAFSA begins to get filled out. It opens October 1st, and you fill it out during your senior year of high school for the following year. You need to fill out FAFSA every single year that you are in college and every single year that you are in graduate school. And we hear a lot from parents who say, like, oh, well, you know, we're not going to qualify for financial aid, so we're not going to fill it out. Fill it out anyway, because 1, it can't hurt. 2, there are a lot of schools in this country that actually might not be able to give you those merit-based scholarship money without filling out FAFSA. Sometimes filling out the financial aid forms is a basic requirement to receive any financial aid from that institution. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to know that just because you think you won't receive anything, fill it out anyway, just in case.
I was gonna say, I'll tackle this next one, and I can even, it stars into the second half of this chart. So parents have plenty of money. Can students still get academic awards? Yes. So generally speaking, for vast majority of the schools in this country, if they offer academic awards, that will not take into consideration what this family is making. So if we look at our chart over here, we have a really early branch, right? We have financial aid and it branches into need-based and merit-based. Generally speaking, need-based is going to be based off that income, that EFC. Merit-based is going to be based solely off of the student and their particular merits. So if we kind of follow that branch of merit-based down, two general groups will give merit-based aid. The institution will often give merit-based aid, whether that's a scholarship because you did great in high school and you got great test scores and great GPA, or if it's an outside party that is something like a business, a nonprofit, something along those lines. Now, what determines merit? This changes from every single school. Generally speaking, a lot of schools will offer academic scholarships, and that will be based off of a GPA. And in the past, it was also based off a test score. That has gotten a little bit trickier, and we'll actually talk a little bit about that later, because since COVID-19 has kind of, happened, a lot of schools have gone test optional. Some schools have even gone test blind. Test optional meaning you have the choice to submit a test score. Test blind meaning nobody can submit test scores. So even if you did great or you did terrible, everybody, you're only looking at that GPA and extracurriculars. So some common topics that happen with merit-based scholarships, we have them listed right there, right? Fine arts. So if we're thinking about theater, if we're thinking about art, sculpture, woodworking, anything that kind of falls into those arts. Music is a very popular one. Academics, so thinking about GPA and oftentimes test scores, depending on where you're applying. Athletic scholarships are technically under the merit-based category in the sense that they are being rewarded for that merit. Other common ones are things like leadership, service. The list can go on and on because each one can be pretty radically different. So just off the top of my head, Hendrix had a Methodist affiliated scholarship because they were a Methodist affiliated institution. They also had a kind of a cultural, spiritual, religious academic award that was for students from all different religions who wanted to discuss and like major or minor in religion or philosophy. So every school can have a pretty radically different one, and they can weight them differently. While some schools, a service scholarship might be worth $2,000 a year. Other schools, their service program might be particularly robust and it might be more competitive, and it could be up to $10,000 a year. So really important to think about this as you make your application, as you're kind of figuring out what are your activities. Those are all things that you need to take into consideration when we think about what scholarships can you apply for.
Yeah, before answering a few more of these questions, a few more things to note. When you are looking at your financial aid award letters, pay very close attention to the wording. And if you are confused, follow up with as many questions as you need to with admissions and with the financial aid department. You need to know if the scholarship being offered is guaranteed for 4 years, or if the number they're sharing is for the total of the 4 years, or if it's each year. And what requirements need to be met in order to maintain that scholarship. Oftentimes, it's a pretty reasonable threshold. A lot of scholarship, like academic scholarships, will require, a 3.0 or 3.5 each semester, and whatever they have, make sure you actually know before you accept your offer to a school. Another thing to note, we have the outside party scholarships under merit-based here, but when you are looking at outside scholarships, it's very important to also note which ones are only available to students with financial need. There are some that are merit-based and need-based all at once, and you're only eligible if you meet certain criteria. So pay close attention to that. Yeah. To answer the question, how important would you gauge the high school rigor as part of admissions? Whew.
I would say it is the GPA and the courses you take are the single largest deciding factor for the majority of colleges. Solid performance over 4 years with escalating difficulty in courses and challenging students, that is the best indicator of the academic performance that a student will have once they reach college. If I'm looking at a transcript and a student has solid grades, and I'm not even saying solid as in like they got A's and everything, like A's, B's, maybe even a C when they had a bad year in pre-calc or something. if I see a grade trend, which is where we look kind of on a chart, and that grade trend is either high and stable or maybe a little bit low but rising, those are the things that are the most important. If you don't have a great GPA, it is incredibly difficult to advocate for a student for admission. This only exception there, and this is something that gets a little bit nitty gritty, but it's worth mentioning. If a student has poor grades because of extenuating circumstances, was there a death in the family? Is there a problem with mental health? Did they get sick and had to miss a lot of school? Those are things that are completely worth mentioning in your application if they affected your academic performance. Because if you don't tell me why you got bad grades, or if there's not a reason for why you got bad grades, my general response is I have to assume that you just didn't try hard or you bit off more than you can chew. You have to give a reason, because if you don't give a reason, then the admission counselor will create a reason. And that's the easiest way to create, because we can't speculate randomly unless we have a reason to.
Another thing to note, we say this all the time to every student, take as difficult of courses as you can do well in. I don't want you to max out the rigor of your high school if you can't be successful in those courses. So there's certainly a balance. Not every student needs to take AP classes. I know, or IB classes or dual enrollment. There is certainly peer pressure. There is certainly like pressure in certain states or cities and things like that. But in general, we want students doing well in school. It's much better to have an A in regular physics than a C in AP physics. Yeah. So keep that in mind as you're navigating the high school course selection piece. Oh, we're getting such good questions. Okay. So hard and fast rule about work study jobs that may be offered only if the cost of attendance is above your EFC. No. So when appealing aid, it's always okay to ask for a work study or for more money. Odds are, if you weren't offered a work study initially and there hasn't been a significant change in the family financial situation since the prior year's taxes were filed, because it's like a 2-year window. Mm-hmm. It's unlikely that they'd award a work study. The threshold, your EFC has to be pretty low to be awarded a work study.
Right. We're going to hold off on this question. It's a good one, but we tackle it a little bit later. Can you combine athletic money with need-based financial aid? We have a whole discussion later about what is stacking. What does that mean? And what does that policy mean for you and your family when it comes to getting scholarships, and how do they stack on each other? When you bring out scholarships from outside of the school, how do they work together? All of those kinds of things. I think the next question was also talking about, is it true that if you're taking rigorous courses and have a lower GPA, are you going to have a better shot than someone with a higher GPA and general classes? Referring back to what I said the first time, we want to see those rigorous courses. Generally speaking, I'm thinking back to my experience working with case studies with other college counselors and other admission counselors. We would take the 3.85 with the honors classes if this was the only thing we were looking at. Like if these were the only 2 pieces of information we had, we would want that, because those honor courses, at least at surface level, show an engagement in the material. It shows a progression towards college level courses. So we have a student that has a better idea of what the challenge will be once they arrive to our campus. It also shows an intellectual curiosity, so pushing themselves to learn more and take these more rigorous courses. That being said, I'm going to echo what Jess said here, and I'm going to give a very straightforward example of why we say students should take the most rigorous courses that they can do well in. And the reason being is, let's think about AP or IB. Well, I'll use AP as the example because it's a little bit easier, but you're taking AP World History. Now, why do you take AP World History? Hopefully it's because you love learning, but most people are also taking it because it looks really solid for, a college admissions transcript. Now, let's say you take AP World History and you do great. Awesome. We love it, because what you've shown me is that AP is tough, AP is college level, and you can succeed college level. Now let's take the other side. So you take AP World History and you do poorly. That's a lot of negatives. And the reason being is, one, if you take a little bit of a dive, it's going to hurt your total GPA, which is often the thing that's used to calculate scholarships and academic merit-based aid. And on top of that, this is kind of the unfair side. If you do poorly in that AP World History, not only is your GPA going to take a hit, but also I'm going to think in the back of my mind, like AP courses, that's college level courses. And this student couldn't really handle it. Are they ready to come to our college with our academic rigor? And that's a little unfair, because then if you take that common course, somebody who just takes world history and gets a 100, their GPA is going to look great. And I'm going to not really bat much of an eye at it.
I will also say, though, this comparison of a 3.85 and a 4.0, that's an easy answer for us.
Yeah.
If we're looking, though, at a 3.0 with honors classes and a 4.0 with general classes, we want that 4.0.
Yeah.
So there, and I can't actually tell you what that threshold might be. It can be dependent on the student's intended major. It can be dependent on which courses brought the GPA down. There are so many factors that go into play. And what's truly mind-boggling is, and get this, admission officers typically have 4 to 7 minutes to read an entire student's application.
Yep.
That means their transcript, their activities list, any and all essays, everything about their school, and everything in between. It's insane. And that's at a school that actually takes the time to read all your applications. UCLA this year got 140,000 applicants. And I can tell you, they pay $2 per application for the readers. There's not too much incentive to spend much time getting to know the student. So it's very important to make these choices early on and really focus on keeping those grades up.
Right. We're going to answer one more question and then keep them coming, but we're going to move to the next slide.
We've got 2 more.
Oh, 2 more.
We skipped one.
Oh, we did.
Yeah. Okay, so can you combine athletic money with need-based financial aid? Absolutely.
That was the stacking one, I think. Anyways.
Anyway.
Yes. Does admissions take into account the reputation rigor of a high school attended? This varies from college to college. I will say that many colleges will have their own scoring system of what your school is on a rating, which is a really vague thing to say. And colleges are generally will never, they're not supposed to say that. I say that now since I'm outside of the college world.
Don't tell them.
But yes, sometimes that even factors into merit-based scholarships. So a student with a lower GPA, but going to a significantly more rigorous school can oftentimes get like a small boost in the calculation or the formula to determine the academic scholarship. Now, that's not every school. It also does have some good reasons. The reason being is that there are some fantastic schools out there who just flat out don't offer advanced honors or AP courses. Sometimes on a philosophical level, they just won't offer them, but they are some of the most challenging high schools in the nation. So that's a way of kind of evening it, but we get into a really weird nitty-gritty scenario where who decides what high school is ranked what? And that is a really good question, one that many admission counselors have no clue even. Honestly, very few even director levels might know why exactly a school is rated that way. That's a whole nother conversation, though.
Two main points, though, that should probably be hit. Most high schools, the majority of them, have something called a school report that is sent with a student's application. And that school report breaks down the courses that the school offers and also key information that might help a admission officer make a decision. So that often will include things like, we limit our students to 3 AP courses a year, or on average, our students take 9. That kind of information can also be very indicative of comparing rigor between students at the same high school. The other thing to know is the majority of colleges will recalculate your GPA. So whatever you see on your transcript likely is not what they're going to actually be looking at or caring about. For very specific example, the UCs do not utilize freshman year grades. Your GPA at the UCs is recalculated purely on sophomore and junior year. That does not mean you can mess up your freshman year. If you haven't, do not. And what it really means is those 2 years should probably be some of the most rigorous years of your high school education. Grain of salt.
Right.
And yes, the school report is something that the high school's counselor typically will send to
Right.
the colleges.
And specifically, we have a scholarships timeline.
Here's
so
a timeline. Nice. Okay, so 9th grade is not too early to start applying to scholarships. There are scholarships available for 9th graders. That doesn't mean you should spend your weekend applying to scholarships. It means like maybe throughout the year, spend a few hours looking, okay? 9th grade is also, or earlier, a fabulous time to start talking to a financial planner who is very specifically focused on college financial planning. There are people who can help you navigate how to keep your EFC as low as it can be. There are people who can help you figure out what you might need to do in order to get more financial aid and things like that. Important to kind of start that process early so that by the time you get to 11th grade and you're building that college list, you know what schools can be affordable, and there will not be a situation in which you apply and get into a school that you cannot attend. That breaks our heart every year, and it happens every year despite having these conversations early on. Trust us, that is worth the investment, every single penny. So for 9th graders, there is an app called Raise Me. This is actually for 9th through 12th graders, but I'm talking about 9th graders because if you can get this going early on, it will benefit you greatly later. It's an easy app. Get it on your phone. You input your grades as you get them in, your extracurriculars, your hours of community service, everything as it's going. Few reasons why this is cool. You have a record of it because I promise you, by 12th grade, you're not going to remember how many hours you spent in a soup kitchen or whatever it was that one Saturday in December. It also can start to give you a sense of what kind of financial aid, like merit-based scholarships, you'll qualify for. A lot of them with Raise Me, it's specifically tied to universities. So if you have universities that you're interested in that are on the app, you add them to your profile and they'll tell you, like, based on this, you can expect to be awarded, $20,000 or $30,000, which is awesome. There are also some schools that will stack the Raise Me scholarships on top of whatever they actually offer you. There is no reason not to. It's entirely free.
And going through, so there's nothing particularly special about these scholarships. These were literally just as a demonstration, scholarships that we knew for each specific year that we could think of off the top of our head. Now, there are hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, probably, maybe even more truthfully, of scholarships out there. I mean, to give you an example, while I was making this, I was looking at some interesting scholarships. I stumbled upon a scholarship. It's only $1,000, but hey, $1,000 is $1,000. And it was a scholarship for memes. Yes, internet memes, the stupid, goofy cats or videos or whatever. And it was literally students submit the best meme they can make, and they can get $1,000 from it. So when we talk about there are a lot of scholarships out there, there's so much to explore. Something worth noting too, just at the bottom, and I put this in here because a lot of times students forget, but we are both living examples of this. Once you start college, there are still scholarship opportunities available in various ways. So there might be some undergraduate scholarship opportunities. Jess can talk a little bit about that. And those can sometimes bleed into graduate school scholarships. And for me personally, study abroad opportunities and scholarships. I went abroad twice in college, and neither time did I pay for a single cent. Because I applied through the Department of the State Department for learning a critical language. So I was going to China. I got a paid internship to go abroad to China another time. So it's one of those things where just when you get into college, that's not the end of your ability to find scholarships. There are other opportunities.
And knowing this early on that these opportunities exist is super helpful because you can know that, like in 11th grade, this Brian Cameron Foundation Scholarship, you can right now look at what the qualifications are. You can look at the bios of the students who have earned it. It's a brutal application. It's a lot of essays, but it's essays that you can actually use in your college application. So it's not like it's additional work. It's just work that gets done earlier. And the priority deadline is in June of students' junior year. So knowing ahead of time that these things exist, and that is not the only one. There's a Calvin Coolidge scholarship for juniors too. You got to read a book, write a few essays. Full ride scholarship to any university. And by full ride, I mean, I believe they also cover room and board. But yeah, so while you're in, there are many opportunities for scholarships through college, the college in general, the straight admissions office. Some particular departments also might have additional funding for students, even freshmen. And there are scholarships so I had a scholarship for graduate school, and students can get it for undergraduate school as well. It's called SMART, which is an absurd name, but stands for Science, Mathematics, and Research for Transformation. Mind you, I was a cognitive science psychology major. So they really do exist for everyone. But so for graduate school, they paid full tuition at a private institution. They gave me a salary to not work while I was in school. They paid for books, health insurance, paid internships, job waiting for me after school that also paid very well. That's how I wound up on a missile range, everyone. But overall, in the 2 years I was in my master's program, they invested like $256,000 into me, and I don't owe them anything. I did my time. I worked for them for 2 years, made even more money. It was great. You can get that as an undergraduate. You have to be enrolled at a college. So October of your freshman year of college, you can start applying for it. There are infinite opportunities to make college affordable if you're willing to commit the time and energy to do so.
Yes. And I love all these questions. The only thing I love more than getting a lot of great questions is already knowing that the next slide is going to answer your question. So where do you find these scholarships, right? A question was asked, what sites do we recommend? On our website, we actually, we have a list of scholarship service engines. Some of them are better than others. Some of them are maybe more specific than others. But it's worth looking through most of them, and almost all of them will have some sort of a filter function. So what are you interested in studying? What are your demographics? All that kind of stuff. And so that's something that is worth looking at. We list all of them here. There's also a list on our website, which we'll have at the end of the presentation, which of course we would love for everybody to visit. But where can you find these scholarships, right? So continuing our who, what, where, when, why. Your high school guidance counselor can often be a really good resource, particularly for local scholarships. That's something that a lot of people don't really think about. I'll use myself as an example again. I got a Rotary Club scholarship when I was in high school. I had no clue what a Rotary Club was. As a 17-year-old, I was like, I don't like a Rotary phone. Like, what's going on here? I didn't know what it was, but I asked. I went to my college guidance counselor. I said, look, here's the deal. I don't have any money. I want to go to college, and I'll apply to any scholarship. What do you have for me? She mentioned it. Because it was local, there were only about 20 students that actually ended up applying for it. I ended up getting it, and it was $2,500 a year, each year, all 4 years. And that was simply because I asked the question and applied. So those small local scholarships can oftentimes be really, really great opportunities to have a small applicant pool where you actually might stand less than a lottery chance, or I guess more than a lottery chance. Institutions. So we're talking about colleges, right? Colleges and universities will have lots of scholarships, and you can search them on the websites. I'll be the first one to say that college and university websites are sometimes a nightmare. The information isn't always up to date. It is not always obvious where to find it, but you would be shocked at how many scholarships actually exist in a college's database, especially once we get to larger universities. And colleges and scholarships that are very specifically set for demographics that might limit that applicant pool, once again, to give you a better chance. We talked a little bit about the internet, right? Just some good old-fashioned elbow grease, sitting there, Google searching, looking at everything. If you're interested in political science, scholarships for students interested in political science. Jewish scholarships, talking about bold.org is a really interesting one where people can actually create their own scholarships. That's where I found the meme one, as goofy as it is.
There are scholarships, unbelievable scholarships. Cards Against Humanity has 10 full ride scholarships for women in STEM.
Yep.
It's in Foot Locker. You guys should all know about the Foot Locker scholarship, $20,000 a year. because you played a sport in high school. Even if you don't want to play that sport in college, you can't not apply.
Right. And so this comes down to the point where there's just so much information out there that it can be kind of overwhelming. And so that's one of the reasons we even recommend that students kind of take their time, small doses of looking through these different search engines. It's really important because even as much as we live and breathe college admissions, we still don't know, like, you know, all of these scholarships. It'd be simply impossible. And that's kind of the last one is people like us, independent education consultants. We provide scholarship searches. Sometimes we know scholarships, especially given areas. And then we are very big, as we mentioned at the beginning, on providing free content on our website. So we list any scholarships we find that don't normally get put on the radar. So we kind of come to the second to last slide here. Why is financial aid important? This is a hard question to answer, actually, because I think most people in the audience are probably thinking the same thing Jess and I thought when we were making this, which is, why is financial aid important? Because college is expensive. That's maybe the only reason. But we do want to talk about some of the more nuanced things. And so, Jess, can you talk a little bit about realistic expectations?
Yeah, so it's very important. We think it's very important that students are actually involved in some of the financial discussions. They don't need to be involved in everything. They don't need to know the entire family finances or anything like that. But it is very important for them to have a stake in the game. And part of that is understanding what the sacrifice actually is for them to go to college. $10,000 a year is a lot. $50,000 is a lot more. And a lot of schools, sticker price, are going to, like, with room and board and everything, close to $80,000 a year. We're talking like more than a house down payment, more than a house in a lot of states. So it's really important to understand what is actually doable. Like we said earlier, we really don't want students applying to schools that they can never afford. It happens every year. And it hurts us every time because the students are so excited and so proud of themselves for getting into these incredible institutions that just will never pay to go there. Right. And it's devastating for everyone.
Right. The second point being, no college is worth full price. And we've talked a little bit about all these, but it's always good to kind of hammer home the main points as we reach the end of our presentation. As I talked about, the GPA, right? That is the single greatest indicator of success for a student is not where they will attend, but what they do while they're there. No college, and I will say this and say it 100,000 times, no college, regardless of their rankings, will guarantee a student's success. It simply will not happen. There are some schools, so like, let's use Harvard. It's the example that everybody loves to use. A Harvard degree will carry some amount of inherent value because we have given it value, right? Because people associate really smart with Harvard. But that being said, there are plenty of studies that show that it is a student and a student's level of engagement and proactive ability to take advantage of what they've actually gone to that actually determines their long-term success, their long-term happiness, their long-term financial gains. So that's something we talk about a lot, is college fit, right? Fit is academic, fit is cultural, fit is financial. Fit is where a student can go and have fun, be happy, and also be successful in life. And none of those are mutually exclusive. And then along the same lines, student loans. We've talked a lot about this, but no college is worth full price. And also, you really want to be careful with student loans. Like I said, they're tools at the end of the day. But as most people know, tools can be misused and tools can be used inappropriately, and it can lead to harm. In this case, it would be financial harm, but we don't want to take that lightly.
You want to minimize loans.
Yeah.
And just to stress again, it does not matter where you go to college. We're college counselors. People don't even ask us where we went. People don't ask us anything about that. And I can guarantee you that what people are more interested in are graduate education, if that's a field, if you're in a field that requires that. But even then, once you have your first job, what matters is what your job was and what you did there. Right. The same way that that's all that matters in college. So You're going to hear the same names of colleges over and over in movies and TV from your friends, from your family, from everyone around you. And I want you to know that some of the nation's best kept secrets are small liberal arts colleges throughout this country that no one's ever heard of in places you might not think to go, like Iowa. But I can promise you some of the best colleges in the country.
So we're going to do a quick rapid fire of these other things. These are really awesome topics, things we knew we wouldn't maybe have time to cover in depth, or maybe didn't have enough information to warrant a whole slide. Some of them we've even already talked about, but just going down the list. We've talked a little bit about need aware versus need blind. So similar to, we talked about test optional and test blind, need aware and need blind is how admission officers will consider your financial situation. So most colleges in this country are going to be need blind for admissions. That means when I'm reading your application, I cannot consider your financial state of your family, whether it's ridiculously high or whether it's incredibly low. I'm only looking at the merits of that student. Need aware, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. We're going to look at a student's application, their merits, but we are also going to consider what is the financial situation of a student. And oftentimes parents will then ask, well, why would they ever do need aware? The reason is these are usually colleges that provide full financial need that for students that need it. Now, how can you do that? The truth of the matter is, for those incredibly gifted, incredibly proactive and engaged people who have very low incomes, in order to pay for them to go and give to a college or university all of their talents, they need somebody who is going to help balance that out by paying a full amount to go to a college.
Colleges are businesses.
Yeah,
very important.
At the end of the day, nobody benefits from a college if they can't keep the lights on. That's just the hard truth.
Scholarship stacking. Whew. Depends on the college. Some schools will allow scholarship stacking. Kind of briefly touched on this before, but scholarship stacking basically is like if you were to get, let's say you apply to a school, they come back with an offer of admission, and they say, we can give you $20,000 a year in scholarship money. Fafsa comes back, you get, $5,500 in loans, you get your work study for $3,000, and there's still a chunk of money that needs to be paid to the school. And that chunk of money is probably around $40,000 to $50,000. So you apply to a bunch of outside scholarships and you get some. Some schools will actually take that money. You can absolutely use it. It's your money, but they're actually going to minimize their free money, their free aid they're offering first. So that money won't go towards removing those loans necessarily. It might actually just remove some of your scholarship money. It's important to actually ask these questions ahead of time when you're building your college list. If financial need is something that you're considering, just ask, can you stack scholarships? There's something called there are some exchange programs like the Western Undergraduate Exchange where students in specific states are offered discounted tuition rates, so they don't pay out-of-state tuition, but they pay a little bit more than in-state. And oftentimes when you get one of those awards, they'll remove everything else. So you can't actually get a steeper discount by having more scholarships. They'll just keep removing the free money, which sounds terrible, but again, colleges are businesses.
Right. And I will say stacking is easily one of the most complicated parts of the financial aid process, even on the inside. Most admission counselors are not going to understand stacking policies. Many of them will just flat out say the wrong things, unfortunately. Oftentimes, if you have a question about stacking, it will lead you straight to the financial aid department where you have people who live and breathe it. And even then, I often will just tell families, ask them to write down a scenario for you, because then you have a good, hard fact sheet with some scenarios on it so you can really understand, instead of like verbal communication that as soon as you get in the car to go back home, it's out of your brain.
Yeah.
Is a school test optional for admissions? Make sure it's test optional for scholarships. So this is really important. As we talked about, COVID has kind of created this renaissance of test optional for schools. A lot of schools are very straightforward with if they're test optional for admission, meaning that you don't have to submit an ACT or SAT score to be considered to get accepted into the college. Now, the next level question that everybody should ask if they plan on doing test optional, are your scholarships also test optional? because that is not the case in every single college. And very much one of the nightmare scenarios is that you get into a college, you close a bunch of doors, and then it's revealed that you don't get any scholarships because you got in test optional. I don't like that. Most people in the education world do not like that, but there are quite a few institutions that make a differentiation between test optional for admission and test optional for scholarships. So keep that in mind.
There's a good question out in here. Who's expected to be communicating? This is a student-driven process. We are very much supportive of students being the driving force. That being said, a lot of these financial aid conversations also need to involve a parent. So what we typically recommend is a student reaches out and says, like, look, I have these questions. I would really like to have a phone call with you, and I'd appreciate if my mom can join. I have her CC'd here. Something like that, where you're bringing a parent in, but you're actually taking initiative. Colleges want to see that.
Mm-hmm. Going through these, I was going to say these last few bullet points, and we have a couple questions. Be aware that scholarship applications might be different than the application for admission. Usually you can find this on the website, or you can send an email and ask an admission counselor. But something that is really important is knowing, if you fill out the application for admission, are you automatically considered for scholarships, or is there a separate deadline, a separate timeline that you actually have to send in something else? Once again, to use Hendrix as an example, because I know their policies like the back of my hand, at Hendrix, if you applied, that counted for a merit-based scholarship based off your academics. But if you wanted to do a fine arts or a music or a service or a leadership scholarship, those were separate applications that were due on a separate timeline. So really important when you're looking at these scholarships, make sure that you kind of understand what needs to be filled out, where, and when. The last one I'll also tackle too. This is, once again, a topic that could be an entire presentation, but we did want to mention it. So what is tuition discounting? So a lot of times when people think about scholarships, they think of it almost like a check. But really, it's not a check. A better way to think about it is a discount. And the reason I say that is because there's a really, really interesting... Did we write a blog about this? I think we talked about it.
No, we did.
Okay, well, we might have. We have a lot of blog posts.
Check out our blogs.
But something really important to consider is that most schools, most college admission offices have something called a discount rate. And that's the rate of discount for tuition. The reason that we specifically say tuition is because almost every college and university on this country or in this country makes majority of their money from students with room and board, that extra $12,000 to $18,000. So even when students get a full tuition, the school is not really losing all their money. They're still going to get that room and board. Most admission offices will actually have a percentage, a threshold that they will not go higher than for a student, because at that point they are losing money on the student. Once again, going back to this being a business. So talking about tuition discounting, it's a really long conversation, but we felt like we would be, we would be amiss if we did not at least use those terms so you could be familiar with them, so that if you hear them or read about them, you'll understand what it is. But that's essentially just the practice of saying, here's our tuition. This is the percentage of threshold that we can give students up to before we start to lose money on a student. This is also important because, unfortunately, as many of you are very well aware, the price of college continues to climb pretty much every year. With inflation, sometimes a little bit more. And if colleges are doing their due diligence, they might increase scholarship amounts as well. But then we get this weird middle class, lower class squeeze, because 30% of 30,000 is not the same as 30% of 90,000. So we end up in this thing where the percentages aren't really connecting with the real life finances of the families. And we see some schools that might do a tuition reset, which is where they drop their tuition down so they can lower the cost of their school. But I'll also let you know that majority of schools that drop their tuition through a tuition reset are also going to drop their scholarships in an equal percentage to keep that same tuition discount rate. So really kind of one of those things where this and scholarship stacking are kind of the nitty gritty, but we did want to touch on them at least. And we've got a couple questions we'll answer. We want to throw this up. Obviously, visit our website, virtualcollegecounselors.com. We've got a lot of free information on there. We have free consultations, and we do actually mean free 30-minute consultations. If you want to use our services afterwards, great. If you only need 30 minutes, then that's awesome. Good for you. We're glad to give you a little quick check-in. The other thing is signing up for our monthly newsletter. We send out any updates in higher education, any new blog posts, any kind of presentations we've done. We just, once again, really love helping students and families, and we really always try and remain grounded to that core principle of providing free resources. A couple questions that we have. Yes, how important are the quantity of extracurricular activities and clubs?
We don't care about the quantity. Quality is far more important. We want to see students that are engaged. We don't want students doing things because it looks good for college or because they think it looks good for college. We can see through that. What we want to see is students actually finding their strengths and passions. And in your application, we prefer you don't use the word passion, but because it's way overused, but it's super important to start exploring now in high school what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, and things that might be challenging and opportunities for growth. We would much rather see longevity in extracurricular activities. We have a lot of parents who will ask, like, oh, my kid just, it's mid-senior year and he just started a new club. Should we notify the schools? No, you shouldn't, because it's clearly done just for college. We want you to do things because you genuinely want to do things. That's what makes you you, and that's what makes you unique. And ultimately, people in admissions might ask you some questions, and you need to be able to answer those questions.
Yeah. If you cannot explain why you are doing an activity to me when I'm sitting on the other side of the desk in the admission office, then it does not look good. No matter how impressive it is. And it could be something that you actually, this is something we talk about, right? Growing as people through the college search and gaining that independence and that agency. You might be doing something because you're legitimately passionate about it, but you might not have ever thought about why you're doing it. You need to think about that. That's a really important question. Matter of fact, I would argue why is the most important question in the history of humanity, maybe. And anybody who's had a curious child will know that the why questions lead down an endless loop of self-exploration. But that's something that you really need to consider is we want quality over quantity. We want you to understand why you're doing it. We want it to be things that you're legitimately interested in. And those things also need to be able to tie into who you are, what you're interested in, what you want to bring to a college. That's really, really, really important.
Students ask us all the time, does this count? It all counts. Hobbies count. Yep. Everything you can think of. So yes, high school sports, club sports, oftentimes that might be two different activities, even if it's the same sport. You also have to understand there's very limited space to explain these activities. I'm talking 150 characters in the Common App. That's less than a tweet. And you have only that space to explain how much time and energy you've devoted to your activity. It all counts.
Right. And I appreciate someone sent out a comment talking about guidance counselors being called school counselors. And absolutely, I know that the terminology has changed a lot. I also know that certain schools have different systems. So is the college counseling and the social emotional counseling separate? That's a whole nother thing. The school I went to, we had a college counselor, and then we had kind of a social emotional counselor. A lot of schools, especially larger public schools, might not have the resources for that. A lot of times, especially when we go to international schools, because I traveled abroad a lot, they have a similar situation where is social, emotional, and college counseling in the same, or are they separated? Because counselors, regardless of where they end up on that field or if they're combined, do a lot of things at the high school level, many of which students and oftentimes parents are not even aware of. So I appreciate that.
And a lot of that terminology is different across the country in different schools and different states and different degrees and everything like that. We very much appreciate school counselors, guidance counselors, school psychologists. we love working together collaboratively.
Yes.
So if you ever need help, let us know.
And then our final two questions, which should be relatively quick, for a minute or two over. We have someone asking about international students. Reach out to me directly. You can find my email on the website, or you can set up a 30-minute consultation with us. We can talk about a little bit about international students. And hey, maybe in the future, we might even do a presentation on kind of the international side of this, because in some ways it's very similar. In other ways, it can be radically different, especially thinking about that need blind versus need aware. At pretty much every college, except for maybe 10 to 12 schools in the country, international students are need aware. They will always look at the financial need. And the reason for that is a couple different reasons. But if we're talking about technical reasons, we cannot get a student a visa to come to this country unless they can demonstrate that they have the financial backing to actually pay for the college that they're going to. So there's a whole nother limitation system set in that. Last question we have is, are you sending out a copy of slides to people who registered? I think Jeff will have a better answer for that, but we have the PDF, and a lot of this information is also available in our blogs and on our website. So that is essentially all of our info.
So I'll hop in here. Yes, we're going to send out a recording. It usually takes about 30 minutes to get sent to me. I will send out to everyone else. Also, Jess and Sawyer will, I'll have them send out their presentation with all that, but it will be on the recording anyway. Also, if you do have any questions, you can reach out to us, College Fit Finder, or Jess or Sawyer, and they can help you with anything that comes up, kind of the things that we discussed. But as you can see, there's just tons and tons of information that you should be thinking about. There's information you should be educating yourself with. We hope you learned something tonight. Again, we'll send out the recording pretty soon. I do want to thank Jess and Sawyer. Awesome information. Great job, guys. And thank you, everyone, for being on the presentation. We know it went a good amount of time, but we just feel that there's just so much information that we feel that you guys need. So thanks again, and thanks, Jess and Sawyer.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me, and thank for the great questions.
Take care.
Have a good night, everyone.
All right, bye-bye.